Good afternoon, everyone. It's Jane Lambert here from A New Dawn Training. Over the last few weeks, whilst I've been involved with Inspire, quite a few people have messaged me and asked me what brought me into counselling in the first place, and also asked me whether or not I have counselling myself. And I do. I have counselling regularly with the same lady that I've seen for over 20 years now, called Sheila. She is a magnificent source of inspiration for me, and it was working with her that made me decide, with her backing, to become a counsellor and to train as such. Now, if I go back to very early in my life, I was a child who never felt like she fitted in, and I had a lot of friends, but never felt like I was a part of any group. I'm still in contact with most of my schoolmates. Most of them are on Facebook. We get together. Hi, Michelle. And we have a drink and a chat every so often. But most importantly, our actual school group is still there and still a terrific support for each other. So you may be thinking, okay, well, then what? And those that know me very well know that I never felt like I had a very good relationship with my mum. I had a great relationship with my dad for many years, but unfortunately my dad decided that he was going to do exactly what my mum wanted, and that meant that we all became estranged. This was following something that happened with my daughter, but some of what had happened prior to that became more evident as I started to train and as I had my first lot of counselling. And initially, my first real therapy, or seeing a psychiatrist or anybody in the mental health field, was following the birth of my son. Now, James will be 30 next month, and I had a terrific pregnancy with him, and it was decided that I would have an elective caesarean because with his sister, who is 4 years older, I had to have an emergency caesarean. Now, that wasn't a problem at all. I was really looking forward to it. Following Claire's birth, I'd gone back to work when she was 5.5 weeks old, so I expected fully to be in exactly the same place. Hi, Danielle. Now, what happened that was different was, to cut a long story short, I wasn't given enough of the pain-killing drug in my back. So unfortunately, I felt everything that happened through the caesarean. And as I was wide awake, although I was telling them, I was told it was just because I was wide awake this time and I hadn't gone through a long childbirth like I had with Claire. Now, as you can imagine, the pain was excruciating following this, and with a great deal of help through a doctor who was based at the Queen's Medical Centre. She helped me from our side as we prepared our court case, which was well over 18 months after James was born. And she told me that I was always going to have a problem, and she was right. The problems weren't what you would expect. The problems were, I had a problem with my self-confidence and my self-esteem and about how I looked because of, hi Carla, because of the scars that had been left. Now, Mick didn't have a problem with me, but Mick had been in theatre with me, and we found out at a later date that I had postnatal depression, which lots of new mums do, but I also had post-traumatic stress disorder, and so did Mick. because of what I had experienced in theatre and because Mick had seen, we were almost feeding each other in the same way that an addict would. Hi, Ryan. Now, as time went on, what happened was I fed my body, I fed my anxiety, I fed the depression with food, just like many other people do. And what happened in the long term was that things got quite difficult for me because obviously I still never felt like I fitted in. I went up to a UK size 24, and I remember going, hi Ryan, I remember going to see my GP, and he said to me, Jane, the problems aren't what you're putting in your mouth, the problem's what's going off in your head. The day that we can deal with the two together is the day that you're going to get some answers and you're going to start and heal yourself. And many years went past. My James was 14 when I read about a programme which to me combined them both. And I found out about nutritional food packs with a company called Lighter Life, and that's how I met my counsellor Sheila, who was a counsellor for them. And over 6 months I lost 6 stone. I was the smallest I'd been in my adult life since way before I'd got married, and I felt terrific. And it was Sheila who said to me, I think you would make a really good counsellor. Now, I was still having all my therapy with her, but this was part of a group setting. And at the most, there would have been 12 in a group. We never were allowed to go any bigger. But one Christmas, when the snow was really bad, further south from where Sheila lives, but actually not too bad up here, I was able to get to her and nobody else could, because I was travelling south to Leicestershire from Derby. And I was extremely lucky that night that Sheila picked up on something I'd said about my birth with James, and that night was a eureka moment for me. She made me realise this wasn't all my fault. It was time to stop beating myself up for being fat. There's no two ways of putting it. And that night I started to heal. And I came home and I spoke to my husband about it, and I said to him, one day maybe I can help somebody the way Sheila's helping me. And it was that thought in the back of my head that when she said to me, why don't you train as a counsellor? That was what I decided to do. Now that was a very difficult thing to do financially. I had a massive amount of money to get together for the training. I had to get a career development loan. There was whether or not to go into premises. The house was deemed satisfactory by Lighter Life, and I started my training. And over 2 years, we were literally given 2 years to get the training done. In the first 3 months, it was 165 hours, which took some doing because I was still working full time, and I was initially still working as a volunteer at a gymnastics club, helping to coach young gymnasts. Now, it became patently obvious after the first few months that that would have to go, because now it was time to set up my business. And I really worried as to whether or not I was going to be able to do this. Was I going to be able to help people? Were people going to come to me? Because by now I'd borrowed a substantial amount of money, and I'd got to be able to pay it back. But I held my first information sessions, and that was in the August, and by Christmas I was running 4 groups. By Christmas I started to see 72 people. And the pleasure that I got of not just seeing people lose weight, because just like for me, it wasn't just about losing weight, it was about finding out why we behaved around food the way that we did. Where for me, it was and always is a soothing thing. When something upsets me, I reach out for something to eat. Many people do that. For us, it's an addiction in exactly the same way as people who aren't coping with COVID and the situation we're all finding ourselves in at the moment. That is that they will choose to have a drink. If you smoke, you're probably smoking more. People like me are probably eating a bit more. And although we know that that's what we do, if I was a heroin addict, I can't go literally round the corner and buy heroin for my fix, but I can go to the corner shop 24 days, 24 hours a day, 7 days a year. Hi, Karen. That means that my addiction is so much easier to get hold of. So that's how I came into counselling. That's why I decided to train as a counsellor. Over the years, I've trained in further fields. So I work with cognitive behaviour therapy, transactional analysis, and neuro-linguistic programming. I'm also a qualified masseur, and I also am an Asui Reiki master and a Celtic Reiki master. So I've had clients say to me, so you work with the mind, the body and the soul. And that's what my business is about. I like people, whatever they're coming to see me for, to leave better than when they first arrived. It's all about feeling better for me. So over the years, I've worked with a number of different people in different settings. I've worked with one of America's top 100 women, Raquel Lerner, who is a magnificent human being. And I met her at Crossroads Antigua when Mick and I were very lucky to be asked to go. Now, Crossroads is a drug and alcohol centre set up by Eric Clapton following his addictions, and he runs that facility to help people beat their addictions. And Mick and I were extremely lucky to meet a lot of the people that work there, and consequently I was asked to join them a couple of times in London, and I did that with pleasure. It was some of the most special times in my life to work with such a high calibre of people. And over the years, I have done other work as well, both out in Antigua and here in England at different facilities. And I love the fact that I've been able to do that, that I've been able to help people without any payment. I have helped a number of the military. The first guy that I ever worked with was an RAF, one of the RAF personnel, and I've worked with quite a few of those now, and also with soldiers from the army. Each time they've come to me with a form of PTSD and said to me, well, what the hell would you know? You've never been to war. And actually, no, I haven't. I haven't seen what they've seen. I haven't experienced what they've experienced. But as I said to them, how many cesareans have you had with no painkillers? And suddenly then they realise that my mindset is the same as theirs. This has meant that over the years, not just for them, but for women who've had very traumatic births, like my second one was, I've been able to help them carry on and actually go on to have more children. They've gone through another birth because I've helped them through it. I've helped several ladies and gents following bad car accidents and helped them get back behind the wheel again. One of the most fascinating experiences I ever had. I just had this idea with somebody following a car accident that if I took her back to the place where the accident happened, we could deal with some of her trauma. And it was a freezing cold, foggy day in November, and I'm there with my Union Jack umbrella, and I took her back to where this crash was on Manor Road in Derby. A car had come down the hill, had flown over the central reservation, taking a lamppost that had been in the middle and literally chopping it off. He'd hit two cars, and one of them was in front of her. How nobody died, it's a miracle. And that lady, she was taken out of that car with a tiny scratch on her arm. But in her head, the scars were massive. And we got her driving again. Actually, she even had the same car. Hi, Sue. She even had the same car that she'd had prior to the crash. I don't know if I could have done that, but she was able to do it. With the PTSD with the military, I worked with one soldier who'd been shot in his back, and he was convinced he had an enormous scar that was about 8 inches wide and that it was quite thick. And I said, have you seen it? He said, oh no, I don't want to see it. So I said, well, who has seen it? And he said, my mum and my partner. I said, let me have a look, and I'll tell you quite truthfully how it looks. He said, I can't do that. But he felt the pain in his back still. And over the next few months, as I gained his trust, he finally let me take a photograph of his scar with my phone. And the scar was probably about 3 inches, maybe only 2.5. And it was a tiny, thin white line. And he couldn't believe that that's what it looked like, because in his head, it was a burgundy colour. It was still raw. It was still hurting him, and it felt like it was on fire. And actually, that was a memory of his trauma. He felt that bullet in his back, that fire. So with my massage, I was able to desensitize the scar, and that took, again, many weeks. And then it was about the smells that he'd got in his nostrils of where he'd been. And there was a smell of curry sauce and of fish, because that's what the people where he'd been in wartime had been living on. That's what he could smell when he walked in shops, when he walked past houses or blocks of flats. That was the smell. And one of the things that I asked him was, what sort of a smell did he like? And he told me he liked the smell of jasmine, because he could remember, I think he said it was his nan or his gran had a jasmine bush behind her house. And I work with jasmine oil. And hi Sam. The jasmine oil, we put little tiny dots just here. And they were tiny dots because there's only lavender you're allowed to put onto bare skin, that's when it's not diluted. But I needed to see if we could get rid of those smells in his memory to replace them with something else. So what I actually did was I took him back to the place he'd been when he was shot. And with the bottle, I told him to tell me with his eyes shut what he could see, what he could hear, what he could smell. And as well as smelling this fish and this curry sauce, he said he'd got the taste of it in his mouth again. And I wafted the jasmine under his nose. And he opened his eyes straight away. And he said, "What did you do then? Because that smell went." And I said, "Here's some jasmine." Now I gave him an incense burner that day to take home and to try a little experiment for me. And I taught him how to use this incense burner because not everybody has used them before. And I got him to take some oil and to set the incense burner going during the evening before he went to bed, so that when he went into his bedroom and he laid down, as he started to go to sleep and his head automatically filled with these terrible things he'd experienced, he couldn't smell the curry and the fish, he could smell the jasmine. And that began to help him heal a little bit as well. Now, over the years, I've worked with many people for many different reasons, from a 7-year-old child suffering from anxiety to my eldest was a 78, 79-year-old lady. I work with everything from anger management, which I've done in schools. I've supported staff through stress management in schools and anxiety and depression. I still support people with whatever they bring to my door. I never thought I wanted to do any couples therapy, but actually I do it and I really enjoy it, and helping people look at their love languages, which is something I have studied through Gary Sandler, is extremely informative. And just like everybody else, there's always more to learn. That isn't to say that I want to experience everything that everybody else experiences, because I don't. The first pregnancy that Mick and I had was a miscarriage. So if somebody comes to me who has suffered a miscarriage, I can speak from experience. I know exactly what that feels like. When people spoke about the death of a parent, because I hadn't got that sort of a relationship that caused massive trauma, I thought I was going to be okay when my parents died. My mother's still alive. My dad died in October last year. And actually, the trauma was just as painful as it had been for other people. Probably because of the memories that I had of when I was a child, and things had been really good with my dad. Consequently, I got into quite a panic and I really needed to see a photograph of my dad. And when we couldn't find it in the loft, I was distraught. The irony was that photograph was in a box with other photographs in a cupboard in my therapy room. So when Mick and I found it when we were doing a spring clean a few weeks back, I was very happy. And at times it's felt like my daddy's with me, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And I have dealt with his death now, and it's not been an easy few months, but last year was a terrible time for an awful lot of people, and including my dad's death, I was in some way, shape or form involved in 17 deaths in 11 months, 4 of them suicides. None of that was easy to deal with, but I didn't realise just how it had impacted me until my dad died, and then my friend, her husband, died. And I was adamant I was going to be able to manage to go to his funeral. For God's sake, I deal with grief management, I deal with stress, I should be able to cope with it. And the morning of his funeral, I had a client who was actually late. And I still remember thinking, oh, well, I'm going to be able to go because it's only 15 minutes to the crematorium. And actually, she was so late, and by the time I got her onto the massage table, we were far too late finishing for us to be able to, for me to be able to go to the funeral. And as I opened the blinds in my therapy room, the car carrying my friend's husband was turning round in our street. And I started to cry. And I knew then that actually I wasn't in a good place to deal with going to another funeral on my own a month after my dad had died. So I don't know everything. I've had a client a few years ago said to me, oh, so you think you're the best counsellor in England, do you? I said, no. He said, oh, well, I bet you think you're the best counsellor in Derbyshire. I said, no, I don't. But I do think I'm the best counsellor for you. If you've resonated with anything at all that I've shared today, or if this has made you think of trauma in your life and you'd like some support, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can contact me through Jane and through Inspire, or through Jane and A New Dawn Training. Tomorrow is VE Day, and I will be celebrating with other people in my street. We are having a street party, social distancing. So I'm going to bake now and pass happiness with my cakes at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon. However you're spending your weekends, please stay safe, stay healthy, and take care till I see you again. I'm live again on Monday at 8 p.m. Bye bye.